The clinking of silver against porcelain was the only music that mattered in Aurelia. It was a symphony of wealth, a delicate percussion accompanying the low, confident murmur of conversations that decided the fate of stocks, companies, and political careers. Sunlight, filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, painted the room in strokes of gold, glinting off crystal water goblets and the diamonds that adorned the wrists of its patrons. Into this carefully curated world of effortless power walked Amelia Vance, her presence as quiet and unobtrusive as a shadow. Her uniform was immaculate, a crisp black blouse, tailored trousers, and an apron tied so precisely it looked like part of the design. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, revealing a face that was pleasant but unremarkable, a face designed to be forgotten. But her eyes, a deep, thoughtful grey, missed nothing. They swept the room not with the harried anxiety of a typical server, but with the cool, analytical gaze of a watchmaker examining the intricate gears of a priceless timepiece. She saw the slight tremor in the hand of the hedge fund manager in corner booth 7, the forced smile of the politician's wife at table 3, the subtle, desperate flirtation of the young woman dining with the aging real estate mogul by the window. Amelia's station was in the most coveted section of the restaurant, a row of plush velvet booths reserved for Aurelia's most distinguished and demanding clientele. Today, the centerpiece of that section was occupied by Beatrice van der Meer and her coterie of 3 friends, women whose faces were as smooth and immobile as polished marble. Beatrice was a fixture in the city's high society, a woman whose inherited wealth was eclipsed only by her legendary sense of entitlement. She wore a Chanel suit the color of cream, and a bored, disdainful expression as if the world were a slightly disappointing dish she was obliged to sample. "Water," Beatrice snapped, not looking at Amelia, but at a point somewhere over her shoulder. She didn't say please. People like Beatrice van der Meer didn't need to. The word was an unnecessary extravagance, like buying off-the-rack clothing. Amelia moved with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful. She filled the 4 crystal glasses from a chilled carafe, the water a silent, perfect stream that didn't disturb the surface until the last moment. She placed each glass on its coaster without a sound. "The Pellegrino," Beatrice commanded, waving a dismissive hand tipped with blood-red nails. "And make sure it's cold this time." The last bottle was practically tepid. "Of course, madam," Amelia replied, her voice a soft, neutral tone. She retrieved the green bottle from its ice bucket, presented the label to Beatrice as was protocol, and opened it with a barely audible hiss. As she poured, one of Beatrice's friends, a woman named Cynthia, leaned in conspiratorially. "Did you hear about the Blackwood Gallery? Complete disaster. They hung the Rothko upside down. Can you imagine the incompetence?" Beatrice scoffed, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Incompetence is the disease of the lower classes, darling. It's everywhere. You see it in galleries, in government, in restaurants." Her eyes flickered to Amelia, a glint of casual cruelty in them. "Some people are simply not meant for detail-oriented work." Amelia's expression didn't change. She finished pouring and placed the bottle back in its silver bucket, the condensation dripping onto the pristine white linen. She was a ghost, a functional object in the periphery of their glittering world. She moved away to fetch their menus, her back straight, her steps measured. She had served kings of industry, media moguls, and even a notoriously private tech billionaire who had tipped her $5,000 on a cup of coffee and asked her opinion on quantum computing. She had handled them all with the same unshakable calm. Beatrice van der Meer was just another gear in the grand, complex machine, a noisy, grating gear, but a predictable one. The lunch order was an exercise in condescension. Beatrice cross-examined Amelia on the provenance of the scallops, the exact temperature of the water the lobster was poached in, and the thread count of the napkins. She sent back her Sauvignon Blanc because the glass was, she claimed, insufficiently chilled, forcing Amelia to fetch a new glass, a new bottle, and perform the entire ritual again. Through it all, Amelia remained a portrait of professional grace. She was patient, her answers were precise, and her hands were steady. This, Amelia knew, was the true test. Not the spreadsheets, the market analyses, or the tense boardroom negotiations. It was this. The ground level, the place where the carefully constructed image of a brand met the messy, unpredictable reality of human interaction. She wasn't just a waitress today. She was a surveyor, a secret shopper in her own potential empire, and she was taking meticulous notes. The manager, a flustered man named Mr. Dubois, had scurried past their table twice, offering Beatrice obsequious smiles, but never once making eye contact with his own staff. A flaw in the system. A weakness. The appetizers arrived. Amelia placed the pan-seared scallops before Beatrice with practiced care. Beatrice stared at the dish for a long moment. The other women paused their conversation, sensing the prelude to a storm. "What is this?" Beatrice asked, her voice dangerously low. "Pan-seared scallops with a saffron risotto, madam," Amelia replied calmly. "Don't be dense. I know what I ordered. I'm talking about this." She pointed a single, accusatory finger at one of the scallops. "This one. It has a slight marring on the surface. The sear is uneven. Do you think I pay $300 for lunch to look at an uneven sear?" Amelia's eyes followed the perfectly manicured nail. The blemish Beatrice indicated was microscopic, a slight variation in caramelization that no one else would have ever noticed. It was a pretext, a manufactured flaw for the sport of it. "My sincerest apologies, madam. I will have the kitchen prepare a new dish for you immediately." "No," Beatrice said, her voice rising. She was an actress who had just been given her cue. The entire restaurant was now her stage. "You won't. You people never learn. You bring me tepid water, a warm wine glass, and now this culinary insult. It's a pattern of disrespect." "I can assure you no disrespect was intended," Amelia said, her voice still even, but a new firmness underpinning it. Beatrice laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that drew glances from every table. "Oh, I'm sure it wasn't intended. Incompetence rarely is. It's just a state of being, like poverty, or a cheap uniform." Her eyes raked over Amelia, from the tips of her polished black shoes to the simple knot in her hair. The air in the restaurant grew thick and still. The gentle symphony of dining had ceased. There was only the tense, uncomfortable silence of a public spectacle. Mr. Dubois began to move toward the table, his face a mask of panic. Amelia stood her ground. She did not flinch, did not look away. She simply met Beatrice's gaze. "Is there anything else I can get for you, madam?" The quiet dignity, the refusal to be broken, was the one thing Beatrice could not tolerate. It was a challenge to her authority, an affront to her station. She wanted Amelia to grovel, to weep, to beg for her job. This placid, unbreakable calm was infuriating. "Yes," Beatrice hissed, her face contorted with fury, "you can learn your place." And then, with a movement as swift and vicious as a striking snake, she raised her hand. The sound of her palm connecting with Amelia's cheek echoed through the silent restaurant. It was a sharp, ugly crack, like a dead branch snapping. The force of it knocked Amelia's head to the side. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Beatrice's friends looked on, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Amelia slowly turned her head back to face Beatrice. A bright red mark was already blooming on her cheek, a stark handprint against her pale skin. Her grey eyes were no longer calm and analytical. They were like chips of ice, cold and hard and utterly unforgiving. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, absorbing the humiliation, the shock, the sting, and converted it all into a silent, terrifying focus. The gear was no longer just grating. It was about to shatter the entire machine. The sting on Amelia's cheek was a grounding force, a sharp physical anchor in a sea of sudden silence. The opulent dining room of Aurelia, with its gilded ceilings and velvet banquettes, seemed to shrink, its rarefied air crackling with tension. Every eye was on her. She could feel their pity, their morbid curiosity, their discomfort. They were watching a drama unfold, a brief, unpleasant diversion from their Dover sole and vintage Bordeaux. Beatrice van der Meer stood there, her chest heaving slightly, her hand still tingling from the impact. A triumphant, vicious smile played on her lips. She had done it. She had shattered the waitress's composure, asserted her dominance. She expected tears, a stammered apology, a desperate plea for forgiveness. Instead, Amelia simply raised one hand, not to her own cheek, but in a gesture that stopped the panicked, oncoming Mr. Dubois in his tracks. He froze mid-stride, his mouth agape, looking like a startled fish. "Madam," Amelia said, and her voice was transformed. The soft, neutral tone of a servant was gone. In its place was a voice of pure, unyielding steel. It was quiet, yet it carried across the silent room with absolute authority. "You have made a grave miscalculation." Beatrice scoffed, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face at the woman's strange, sudden confidence. "My only miscalculation was thinking this restaurant employed competent staff." "Dubois," she shrieked, turning her fury on the manager. "Fire this impertinent creature at once. I want her out of my sight, and my meal, of course, will be comped for the sheer agony of this experience." Mr. Dubois, sweating profusely under his tailored suit, scurried forward. "Yes, Mrs. Vandermeer, of course, right away. My deepest, most sincere apologies for her behavior." He turned to Amelia, his expression a mixture of fear and fury. "You, get your things. You are finished. How dare you upset a patron?" Amelia didn't even look at him. Her gaze remained locked on Beatrice, a predator's stare that was beginning to unnerve the wealthy socialite. The red mark on her cheek was no longer a symbol of humiliation. It was a battle standard. "Mr. Dubois," Amelia said, her voice cutting through his frantic apologies, "your employment here is also under review. I suggest you remain silent." The manager blinked, utterly bewildered. My employment? What are you talking about? I am the general manager." "For now," Amelia replied cryptically. She subtly checked the elegant, understated Cartier watch on her wrist, a piece so discreet that no one had noticed it was worth more than Mr. Dubois' car. The time was 1:30 p.m. Exactly. As if summoned by an invisible signal, the grand double doors of Aurelia swung open. But it wasn't a new set of diners that entered. It was a phalanx. The first man through the door was Arthur Kensington, a man in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair, a bespoke Anderson and Shepherd suit, and the weary, intelligent eyes of someone who had navigated the treacherous waters of international finance for 40 years. He was Amelia's mentor, her chairman, her most trusted advisor. Behind him, fanning out in a silent, disciplined wave, were others. Men and women, all dressed in immaculate, dark business attire. They moved with a synchronized, purposeful energy that immediately altered the atmosphere of the room. The low hum of frightened whispers started to build. There were at least 50 of them. Lawyers with leather briefcases, analysts with tablets, senior partners with grim, serious expressions. They were an army of corporate power, and they had just invaded this temple of leisure. Beatrice Vandermeer stared, her mouth slightly agape. Her initial thought was that someone truly important must have arrived. A head of state, perhaps. A reclusive billionaire. She straightened her jacket, preparing to be seen, to be acknowledged as part of this new, important event. She assumed they were here for someone like her. The army of suits came to a halt, forming a silent, imposing semicircle that effectively cordoned off the Vandermeer table from the rest of the restaurant. The other diners craned their necks, their food forgotten. This was better than theatre. Arthur Kensington's eyes scanned the scene, the shocked faces of the patrons, the terrified manager, the arrogant sneer on Beatrice's face, and finally the bright red handprint on Amelia's cheek. His expression, already serious, hardened into something akin to cold fury. He strode forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. Beatrice, recovering her bravado, stepped forward slightly. "Arthur Kensington? What on earth are you doing here?" She knew him vaguely from charity galas and investment circles. Her husband, Richard, had dealings with Kensington's firm. "Have you come for lunch? I'm afraid the service is just atrocious today." She gestured toward Amelia with a flick of her wrist. "This one, in particular, is a lost cause." Arthur Kensington walked right past her as if she were a piece of furniture. He didn't spare her a glance. He stopped directly in front of Amelia, his entire 50-person entourage standing at attention behind him. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at her cheek, a flicker of paternal concern in his eyes. Then he bowed his head in a gesture of profound and unmistakable respect. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded the attention of everyone present. "I apologize for our tardiness. The traffic on the FDR was heavier than anticipated. Amelia gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "It's of no consequence, Arthur. You're here now." "The final board members have been assembled via teleconference," he continued, his tone all business. "The preliminary reports are on your tablet. We are ready to proceed with the final vote on the acquisition of the Sterling Hospitality Group whenever you are." A wave of murmurs swept through the restaurant. The Sterling Hospitality Group was one of the largest luxury hotel and restaurant consortiums in the country. Aurelia was its crown jewel. Beatrice's perfectly made-up face had gone slack with confusion. "Miss Vance," she repeated, her voice a baffled squawk. She looked from the formidable Arthur Kensington to the waitress in the simple black uniform. "What is he talking about? Who is Miss Vance?" Arthur turned his head slowly, fixing Beatrice with a look of such utter contempt that she physically recoiled. "I am speaking to Ms. Amelia Vance," he said, his voice dripping with ice, "the founder and chief executive officer of Vance Capital Partners, the woman you just assaulted." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a dense, heavy vacuum in which the only sound was the frantic, panicked beating of Beatrice Vandermeer's own heart. Her blood ran cold. The colour drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, horrified mask of her former arrogance. Ms. Vance, Vance Capital, the notoriously private, ruthlessly effective private equity firm that had been making headlines for its aggressive, high-stakes acquisitions. A firm her husband's bank was desperately trying to court for a massive financing deal. She stared at Amelia. The simple uniform, the quiet demeanour, the hands that had poured her water, it was all a disguise, a lie. The woman standing before her, with a red handprint on her face, wasn't a servant. She was a titan. And Beatrice had just slapped her in front of 50 of her most powerful associates. The floor, once a stage for her petty tyranny, now felt like a trap door about to swing open beneath her feet. The name hung in the air, electric and incomprehensible. Amelia Vance, Vance Capital Partners. To the world of high finance, it was a name spoken with a mixture of awe and terror. Vance Capital was a phantom, a ghost in the machine of Wall Street. It moved silently, struck decisively, and acquired assets with a brutal efficiency that left competitors breathless. Its founder was a legend, a recluse who was famously private, never photographed, never interviewed. Rumor had it she had built her multi-billion-dollar empire from nothing. That she was a prodigy who saw the market not as a series of numbers, but as a complex organism whose every breath she could anticipate. And she was standing here, in a waitress's uniform, with a 5-fingered mark of shame on her cheek. Beatrice Vandermeer's mind struggled to reconcile the two images, the powerful, unseen titan of industry and the humble, silent woman she had just humiliated. The cognitive dissonance was so severe it made her feel dizzy. Her friends, Cynthia and the others, were frozen in their seats, their faces pale with shared horror. They were accomplices, they realized, to an act of social and financial suicide. Amelia took a deep, steadying breath. The actress was gone. The CEO was now in her place. She turned her cool grey eyes on Mr. Dubois, who looked as if he was about to faint. "Mr. Dubois," she said, her voice calm and lethally precise. "For the past 3 weeks, my team has been conducting a final due diligence audit on the Sterling Hospitality Group. The numbers looked promising. The assets are strong, the brand has prestige." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But a company is not just its balance sheet. It is its people, its culture, its soul. So I decided to conduct a final personal audit. I wanted to see the crown jewel, Aurelia, from the inside. I wanted to understand the employee experience, the management protocols, and most importantly, the customer service philosophy at its most granular level." She gestured around the opulent room, "And I have seen it. I have seen a culture where management is terrified of its clientele, a culture where employees are not supported, not protected, and are treated as disposable. A culture where a patron, Mrs. Vandermeer," she finally turned her full, chilling gaze back to Beatrice, "can physically assault a member of staff with no immediate repercussions, and in fact is immediately placated by management." Mr. Dubois made a small, choking sound. I I didn't know. How could I have known? That is precisely the point, Amelia cut in sharply. It shouldn't matter who I am, whether I am Amelia Vance, CEO of Vance Capital, or Jane Doe, a single mother working a double shift to pay her rent. Your job is to maintain a standard of excellence and a safe environment for both your guests and your staff. You have failed on all counts. You valued the appeasement of one wealthy bully over the dignity of your employee. You are a liability. She turned to Arthur Kensington. Arthur, make a note. The entire senior management team of Aurelia is to be terminated, effective immediately. Begin a search for a new general manager, someone with a background in employee advocacy as well as luxury service. I want our new culture to be built on a foundation of respect, from the dishwasher to the CEO. Right away, Ms. Vance, Arthur said, tapping a note into his tablet. A wave of shock rolled through the staff who had been watching from the sidelines, a mixture of terror and a dawning, unbelievable sense of vindication. Now, Amelia's attention settled fully on Beatrice. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Beatrice felt pinned by that icy gaze, stripped bare of her wealth, her status, her Chanel suit. She was just a woman who had made a terrible, terrible mistake. Mrs. Vandermeer, Amelia began, her voice dropping to a conversational, almost intimate tone, which was far more terrifying than shouting. My firm, Vance Capital, is in the final stages of a $1.2 billion acquisition of Sterling Hospitality. A deal, I might add, that is being partially financed by a $300 million line of credit from a consortium of banks, the lead of which is, if I'm not mistaken, Vandermeer Global Banking and Trust. Beatrice's breath hitched in her throat. Her husband, Richard. This was his deal, the deal he had been working on for 6 months, the one that was meant to cement his legacy as CEO. Richard, Beatrice whispered, the name a desperate prayer. Yes, Richard, Amelia affirmed. I had a very productive meeting with him last week. He spoke at great length about his bank's commitment to ethical partnerships and community-minded investments. A very polished presentation. It seems, however, that his wife does not share those values. She took a step closer. Beatrice flinched. You see, your actions today have given me pause, Amelia continued, her voice a silken threat. They have introduced a new variable into my calculations. Reputational risk. If the wife of the CEO of my lead financial partner conducts herself in such a vile, abusive manner, what does that say about the underlying culture of the bank itself? What other liabilities might be hiding beneath that polished veneer? She looked at Arthur. Arthur, please schedule a call with our legal team for 3 p.m. I want to invoke the material adverse change clause in our financing agreement with Vandermeer Global. I'm no longer comfortable with the terms. We will be seeking a new lead partner. The words struck Beatrice with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about a comped meal or a fired waitress anymore. This was a multi-million-dollar catastrophe. Richard would be ruined. The bank's stock would plummet. The board would demand his resignation. Their family name, their standing, their entire world. She had set it all on fire with a single arrogant slap. No, Beatrice pleaded, the sound pathetic and hollow in the vast silent room. All her haughty pride had evaporated, replaced by a raw primal fear. Please, it was a mistake. I was having a bad day. I'll apologize. I'll pay for anything. Amelia looked at the red mark on her own face, then back at Beatrice. You will do more than apologize, she said coldly. You will find that your credit cards issued by your husband's bank have been frozen, pending an internal review of this incident. Your membership at every club, charity and board associated with the Sterling Group or Vance Capital is hereby revoked. You will be persona non grata. You wanted me to learn my place, Mrs. Vandermeer. Instead, you are about to be taught yours. Amelia turned her back on the crumbling socialite, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. Arthur, let's conclude this business. The vote. Of course, Miss Vance, Arthur said, gesturing to his team. The army of suits stirred, their focus shifting from the drama to the business at hand. Tablets were raised, documents referenced. They were a well-oiled machine, and their leader had just given them their orders. The acquisition was moving forward, but the world had irrevocably shifted for everyone in that room. Beatrice van der Meer was left standing alone in the wreckage of her own making, a pariah in the very world she had once ruled. The transition was breathtaking. One moment, Amelia Vance was the central figure in a tense personal drama. The next, she was the calm eye of a corporate hurricane. The 50 men and women of her team converged around her, creating a moving boardroom in the center of Aurelia. The other patrons, who had been frozen in place, were now discreetly being presented with their bills by the remaining shell-shocked waitstaff, encouraged by restaurant security to conclude their meals. The show was over, and they were being ushered out before the real work began. Amelia ignored them all. She took the tablet Arthur offered her eyes scanning the final acquisition terms, her mind processing complex financial data with lightning speed. The red mark on her cheek was still visible, but it seemed like a relic from another lifetime. She was no longer a victim. She was a commander on the verge of a great victory. Beatrice remained rooted to the spot, a statue of disbelief. Her friends, seeing the titanic shift in power, had quietly gathered their things and scurried away like rats from a sinking ship, leaving Beatrice utterly alone. She watched as Amelia, the woman she had struck, now dictated terms that would reshape a billion-dollar industry and shatter her own life. The sheer scale of her misjudgment was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. The vote to acquire Sterling Hospitality Group for the agreed-upon price of $1.2 billion is now called, Arthur Kensington announced, his voice resonating with formal gravity. The board members, both present and on teleconference, were polled. A chorus of ayes filled the room, a quiet, decisive drumbeat of consensus. "The motion carries unanimously," Arthur declared. He looked at Amelia. "Congratulations, Ms. Vance. You are now the owner of this restaurant." A faint, mirthless smile touched Amelia's lips. She looked around the room, not with the eye of a diner, but with the critical gaze of a proprietor. "Our first order of business," she said, her voice carrying to the few remaining staff, "will be a complete overhaul of employee compensation. All staff, from porters to line cooks, will receive an immediate 20% raise. Full health and dental benefits will be effective as of the 1st of next month. And we will be instituting a zero-tolerance policy for abuse from any patron, regardless of their net worth. This is no longer a playground for the rich. It is a place of business, built on mutual respect." A few of the waiters and kitchen staff who overheard exchanged looks of stunned, hopeful disbelief. In the span of 30 minutes, their world had been turned upside down for the better. It was then that Beatrice's phone began to vibrate, a frantic, insistent buzzing against the polished mahogany of the table. The screen lit up with a picture of her husband, Richard van der Meer. She stared at it, her hand trembling too much to answer. She knew what that call was. It was the sound of her world ending. The news would have reached him already, a tidal wave of panic ripping through the bank's trading floors and executive suites. Vance Capital pulls out. Material adverse change clause invoked. Reputational risk cited. Amelia noticed Beatrice's vibrating phone. She walked over to the table, her footsteps silent. She picked up the phone and with a terrifying calmness answered it, putting it on speaker. "Richard van der Meer's office," a panicked male voice said. "Who is this?" "This is Amelia Vance," she replied, her voice cool and even. A stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Richard's voice, strained and desperate, came through. "Amelia, Ms. Vance, thank God. There must be some mistake, a misunderstanding. My team is telling me you're pulling our financing agreement. We can fix this. Whatever the issue is, we can fix it." Amelia glanced at Beatrice, whose face was now a mess of running mascara and sheer terror. "Richard," Amelia said, using his first name with a familiarity that was both intimate and dismissive. "There is no misunderstanding. I am currently standing in Aurelia, one of my newly acquired properties, and I am looking at your wife." Another pause, this one filled with a dawning, sickening dread. "Beatrice?" Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. What does she have to do with this?" "Your wife felt it was appropriate to physically assault one of my employees today," Amelia stated, the sentence delivered like a judge's verdict. "As it happens, that employee was me. I was working undercover to evaluate the service culture. So you see, Richard, this isn't a business problem, it's a character problem." And I do not do business with men who cannot control their own house. The culture you tolerate at home speaks volumes about the culture you lead at your bank. My decision is final. Vance Capital is severing all ties with Vandermeer Global. Have your lawyers expect a call from mine." Before a sputtering, horrified Richard could reply, Amelia ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. It was done. An empire shaken, a family disgraced, a reputation incinerated. She turned to leave, her work here complete. Her team fell into formation around her, a protective escort of power and loyalty. As they walked toward the grand entrance, they passed the table where Beatrice stood, a ghost at a feast. Beatrice finally found her voice, a ragged, desperate cry. "Why?" she choked out. "Why would you do all this? Working as a waitress, why?" Amelia paused at the door, turning back to look at the woman who had, in one afternoon, lost everything. "Because I never forget where I came from, Mrs. Vandermeer," she said, and for the first time a hint of her own past bled through her corporate armor. "My mother was a waitress. She worked 60 hours a week at a diner so I could eat. She endured insults, humiliation, and abuse from people exactly like you. She did it all with a quiet dignity you couldn't possibly comprehend. I built my entire company on the foundation of the lessons she taught me. Work harder than everyone else, treat people with respect, and never, ever tolerate a bully." She touched the fading red mark on her cheek. "Today you didn't just slap a waitress, you slapped her memory, and for that, there is no price you can pay. There are only consequences." With that final devastating pronouncement, Amelia Vance turned and walked out of the restaurant, flanked by her army of suits, leaving Beatrice Vandermeer to drown in the silent, opulent ruin she had created for herself. The symphony of wealth had ended, replaced by the deafening sound of a single spectacular fall from grace. The weeks that followed the incident at Aurelia were a brutal education for the Vandermeer family. The story, despite Amelia's preference for discretion, leaked to the financial press. It was too sensational to contain. Billionaire CEO, working undercover as a waitress, slapped by banker's wife, scuttles 300 Mantos deal. The headlines were merciless. Vandermeer Global's stock plummeted by 12% overnight. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Richard Vandermeer, facing a catastrophic loss of confidence from shareholders and the public humiliation of his wife's actions, was forced to tender his resignation. He went from being a titan of Wall Street to a pariah in less than a month. The family was ostracized from the social circles they had once dominated. Invitations dried up, calls went unreturned. The name Vandermeer became synonymous with arrogance and ruin. Beatrice locked herself away in their cavernous Fifth Avenue apartment, the silence of the rooms a constant reminder of her fallen status. Every mirror showed her the face of the woman who had destroyed her own life. The Chanel suits hung in her closet like costumes from a play that had closed. Meanwhile, Amelia Vance was implementing her vision with surgical precision. The Sterling Hospitality Group was rebranded as the Vance Collection. Aurelia, after a brief closure, reopened with a new name, The Gilded Cage, a private, ironic nod to its past. The new general manager was a woman named Maria Flores, who had started her career as a hotel maid and worked her way up, known for her fierce loyalty to her staff. The new employee policies made waves in the industry. The Vance Collection became the most sought-after employer in hospitality, attracting top talent with its high wages, comprehensive benefits, and a corporate culture that genuinely valued every member of the team. Profits, contrary to what traditionalists predicted, soared. Happy employees, it turned out, led to exceptional service and fiercely loyal customers. Amelia never spoke publicly about the incident. When asked by the rare journalist who got close enough, her response, delivered through Arthur Kensington, was always the same. Vance Capital has a zero-tolerance policy for workplace abuse. Our actions reflect that policy. About 6 months after the slap, Amelia was working late in her penthouse office, a minimalist space of glass and steel overlooking the glittering expanse of Manhattan. The city lights were a constant reminder of the world she had conquered. Arthur knocked softly and entered, holding a single envelope. "This came for you," he said, his tone neutral. "By messenger, from a Beatrice Vandermeer." Amelia looked up from her work, her expression unreadable. She took the envelope, It was made of heavy, expensive cardstock, a relic from a life of formal correspondence. Her name was written on the front in shaky, unfamiliar handwriting. She slit it open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The letter was short. Ms. Vance, there is nothing I can write that will undo the damage I have caused to you, to my husband, and to my own life. For months, I have been consumed by hatred for you. I saw you as the architect of my ruin. But I have come to realize that I was the architect. You were merely the force of nature that brought the faulty structure down. My husband and I have separated. Our assets have been divided, and I am left with a fraction of what I once had. It is still more than most people will ever see, and yet I feel impoverished in a way money cannot measure. I have lost my standing, my friends, and my purpose. I write to you not to ask for forgiveness. I know I do not deserve it. I write to tell you that I have started volunteering at a soup kitchen downtown. The first day, a man yelled at me because the ladle I was using wasn't full enough. My first instinct was to lash out, to tell him who I was. But I stopped. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw a person, not an inconvenience. I saw his hunger, his desperation, his humanity, and I remembered the look in your eyes that day. I am not a good person, but I am, for the first time in my life, trying to be. You did not just take my world away, you forced me to see the real one. Beatrice. Amelia read the letter twice. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction. There was only a quiet, somber sense of an ending. She had not set out to destroy Beatrice van der Meer. She had only intended to protect the dignity of her mother's memory and the integrity of her own company. The rest was just collateral damage from a collision of two vastly different worlds. She walked over to the vast window, looking down at the endless streams of light, the millions of lives moving in the city below. Each light was a story, a struggle, a quiet act of dignity, or a loud display of arrogance. Her own story was just one among them. She had built an empire of glass and steel, but it was founded on the simple, unbreakable principles learned in a greasy spoon diner long ago. She held the letter in her hand, the paper a fragile testament to a life irrevocably changed. Then she walked over to her desk, where a high-tech shredder sat humming quietly. She fed the letter into it, and the machine whirred to life, turning Beatrice's painful confession into 1,000 tiny, meaningless pieces. The past was the past. It was time to build the future. 1 year to the day after the incident at Aurelia, the newly christened Gilded Cage was hosting its first major event, the Vance Foundation Gala, a charity fundraiser for educational programs for underprivileged youth. The room was even more spectacular than before, redesigned with a modern, elegant aesthetic. The atmosphere, however, was entirely different. The stuffy, old-world arrogance was gone, replaced by a vibrant energy of innovation and philanthropy. Amelia Vance stood near the entrance, not in a uniform, but in a stunning, simple black gown by a little-known designer she was championing. She was greeting guests personally, her smile warm and genuine. She was no longer a ghost in the machine. She was its heart. The titans of industry and art who filled the room greeted her not with the deference due to a CEO, but with the genuine respect reserved for a true leader. Arthur Kensington stood beside her, a proud, paternal look in his eyes. "A remarkable transformation, Amelia," he said, gesturing to the thriving, happy room. "For this place, and for the whole industry." "We're just getting started, Arthur," she replied, her grey eyes sparkling with purpose. Across the room, a young woman, one of the first recipients of the Vance Foundation Scholarship, was talking animatedly with a tech billionaire. She was a student from the Bronx, the daughter of a seamstress, and she was explaining her award-winning robotics project. She was brilliant, confident, and utterly unintimidated by the wealth around her. She knew her value was in her mind and her hard work, not her last name. Amelia watched her, a deep sense of satisfaction settling over her. This was the point of it all, not the acquisitions, not the billions, not the revenge. It was this: creating a world where a person's worth wasn't determined by their uniform or their bank account, but by their character and their contribution. Later in the evening, as she was making her way through the crowd, she felt a light touch on her arm. She turned to see Maria Flores, the new general manager, her eyes shining with emotion. "Miss Vance," Maria began, her voice thick with gratitude, "I just wanted to thank you. Not just for the job, but for what you've built here. My son started college this fall, on a full scholarship from the foundation. Because of you, my team feels safe. They feel valued. You didn't just buy a restaurant. You gave hundreds of people their dignity back." Amelia was taken aback by the raw emotion. She placed her hand over Maria's. "Dignity isn't something I can give, Maria," she said softly. "It's something you already had. I just made sure it was recognized." As the night drew to a close, Amelia found herself alone for a moment on the terrace, overlooking the quiet, sleeping expanse of Central Park. The city hummed with a million stories below. She thought of her mother, of the long, weary hours she had worked, of the quiet pride she had taken in a job well done, no matter how humble. She thought of Beatrice, a woman who had to lose a world to find herself. A cool breeze rustled the leaves in the park. Amelia Vance, the titan, the CEO, the investor, closed her eyes. She was no longer just the sum of her successes or the architect of another's downfall. She was the daughter of a waitress, and she had finally built a world where her mother would have been treated like a queen. And in the quiet, starlit dark of New York City, that felt like the greatest victory of all. The legacy of that day in Aurelia rippled outwards in ways no one could have predicted. The story became a sort of urban legend on Wall Street and in the service industry, a cautionary tale for the arrogant and a symbol of hope for the overlooked. The Vance method, as some started calling it, which prioritized employee welfare as the cornerstone of luxury service, began to be adopted by other forward-thinking companies, slowly chipping away at the old toxic paradigms. Amelia's life, however, remained intensely private. She gave her money and her time, but never her story. She found that true power wasn't in public acclaim or in the destruction of one's enemies. It was in the quiet, steady work of building something better. It was in the thank you notes she received from scholarship students, in the record-low employee turnover rates across her company, and in the respectful silence of a boardroom that hung on her every word. Years passed. Vance Capital grew into a global force for what came to be known as ethical capitalism. They acquired companies not just for their profit potential, but for their potential to be transformed into better places to work. Amelia became a kingmaker, not by hoarding power, but by distributing it, empowering a new generation of leaders who shared her values. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Amelia, now in her late 40s, decided to skip her chauffeured car and walk the few blocks from her office to a small independent bookstore she liked to frequent. Dressed in a simple trench coat with a scarf covering most of her hair, she was as anonymous as she had been on that day long ago. Inside, the store smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. As she browsed the history section, she overheard a conversation between two young women, baristas from the coffee shop next door on their break. "Did you see that woman who came in earlier?" one said. "The one in the fur coat? She literally snapped her fingers at me. Snap-ped. Like I was a dog." "Ugh, the worst," the other replied. "What did you do?" "I just smiled and said, 'I'll be with you in a moment.' But in my head, I was totally pulling an Amelia Vance on her." The first girl laughed. "Oh my God, yes. The legend, just imagining a fleet of lawyers walking in and her face just crumbling. It's the only thing that gets me through a shift sometimes." Amelia froze, her hand hovering over a book on the Roman Empire. She listened, hidden by the tall shelf. "Seriously," the second barista continued, her voice filled with a kind of reverence. "It's like a fairy tale. The waitress who was secretly a queen and brought the evil witch down. It just proves that you never know who you're talking to. And that being a decent human being is always the right call." Amelia slowly pulled the book from the shelf, her heart full. She had never sought fame, but she had, it seemed, created a myth. A myth that armed overworked, underappreciated people with a sense of hidden power and a shield of dignity. A story that reminded them that respect was their right, not a privilege to be earned. She walked to the counter to pay for her book. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes and an arts degree, rang her up. She handed him her credit card. It was a standard corporate card, but it bore her name, A. Vance. The cashier's eyes widened slightly as he read the name, then looked up at her face, truly seeing her for the first time. A flicker of recognition, of awe, crossed his features. He stood up a little straighter. "Thank you, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice imbued with a newfound respect. "Have a wonderful day." Amelia smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "You too," she said. As she walked out of the bookstore and back into the rain-swept streets of New York, she felt a profound sense of peace. The red mark on her cheek had faded within hours, but the lesson from that day had imprinted itself on the soul of the city. It was a lesson she had learned at her mother's knee and had spent a lifetime proving. The most valuable asset in any room is not the person with the most money, but the one with the most integrity. And that was a truth no amount of wealth could ever purchase, and no amount of arrogance could ever destroy.